I left my book at home. Okay, I'm done. Gotta reach for my book. Hold on. Got it. Okay. Hello, long time no see. Sorry, I was finishing my lunch. I had to go get my freaking registration sticker renewed, and so I've literally been on the road. Okay, but I'm here, and we're starting. What? Oh, let's talk about what I read while I was away. Chapter 42. Lorcan is the love of my life. He's the love of my life. I'm so sorry. There is nothing that y'all could ever say that would make me turn against him after he literally just swore the blood oath to Aelin for a lead, to continue seeing a lead. Come on, y'all. Come on, y'all. I love him so much. Okay. Hold on. Sorry. All right, we're starting on chapter 43. We left off after Aelin's rescue, and then I read a couple chapters by myself. Kale is in Anil with his dad. What else happened? Lorcan swore the blood oath to Aelin. They're on their way to Terrasen. What else happened? I don't really remember. I think those are like the major points. Dorian and Manon are off doing their own thing. I think Manon wants him to go sneak into the Farian Gap to see if he can sneak into Morath. And yeah, loves to see him change his mind about Aelin. I do too. I love y'all. And see, he is a character that has yet to embarrass me. Yes, he's made some questionable choices. He's made some dumb mistakes. But he didn't do it like with malicious intent, you know? So, he is someone that I have yet to be embarrassed by. Exactly. He deserves this little bit of love. Anyway, all right, we're starting. Chapter 43. I am going to be honest, the Manon Dorian chapters have been a little hard to get through. So, it's just it's like a side quest, side story that's going on that I'm not as invested in. I'm waiting to get invested in it, and it's just not happening. But hopefully today's the day, because we're starting with them. All right, chapter 43. Dorian began small, first by changing his eyes to black, solid black, like the Valg, then by turning his skin into an icy, pale shade, the sort that never saw sunlight. His hair he left dark, but he managed to make his nose more crooked, his mouth thinner. Not a full shift, but one done in pieces, weaving the image together in himself, forming the tapestry of his new face, new skin, during the long, silent flight up to the spine of the fangs. He hadn't told Manon it was likely a suicide mission, too. He'd barely talked to her at all since the forest clearing. They'd left with the dawn, when she'd announced to Glennis and the Crochans what she planned to do. They could fly to the Farian Gap and return to that hidden camp within the fangs in 4 days, if they were lucky. She'd asked the Crochans to meet them there, to trust her enough to return to their mountain camp and wait. They had said yes. Maybe it was the grave the 13 had dug all day, but the Crochans said yes. A tentative trust, just this once. So Dorian had flown with Asterin, had used each frigid hour northward to slowly alter his body. You want to go to Morath so badly, Manon had hissed again before they'd left. Then let's see if you can do it. A test. One he was glad to excel at, if only to throw in her face. Manon knew of a back door that only the wyverns took into the northern fang, along with any human grunts unlucky enough to be bound to this place. Asterin and Manon had left the 13 farther in the mountains. Sorry, I thought I had to burp. Before approaching. And even then they'd stopped far away enough from any scouts that they'd spent 6 hours hiking on foot, taking Asterin's mare with them. Abraxas had snarled and tugged on his reins, but Sorel had held him firmly. The 2 mammoth peaks flanking the gap grew larger with each past mile, yet as he approached the southern side of the fang he hadn't realized how massive exactly they were. Large enough to hold an aerial host, to train and breed them. This was what his father and Erwin had built, what Ardalan had become. No wyvern circled in the skies, but their roars and shrieks echoed from the pass as he rode for the ancient gates that opened into the mountain itself. Behind him, led by a chain, Asterin's blue mare followed. Another trainer bringing back his mount after a trip for some air. The few guards, mortal men, at the gates barely blinked as he appeared around a rocky bend. Dorian's palms turned sweaty within his gloves. He prayed the shifting held. He would have no way of knowing, though he supposed few here would recognize his natural face. He'd picked coloring close enough to his own that, should the tapestry within itself unravel, someone might dismiss the altering of his skin tone, his eyes, as a trick of the light. Noreen huffed, yanking on the reins, not wanting to go near this place. He didn't blame her. The reek from the mountain set his knees wobbling, but he'd spent years schooling his expression against the headache-inducing perfumes his mother courtiers wore. How far away that world seemed, that palace of perfume and lace and lilting music. Had they not resisted Erwin, would he have allowed it to still exist? Had they bowed to him, would Erwin have maintained his ruse as Parrington and ruled as a mortal king? Dorian's legs burned, the hours of walking taking their toll. Manon and Asterin lurked nearby, hidden in the snow and stone. They no doubt marked his every move while he inched closer to the gates. His parting words with Manon had been brief, terse. He dropped the 2 word keys into her awaiting palm, the amulet of Orinth clicking faintly against her iron nails. Only a fool would bring them into one of Erwin's strongholds. They might not be your priority, Dorian said, but they remain vital to our success. Manon's eyes had narrowed as she pocketed the keys, utterly unfazed at holding in her jacket a power great enough to level kingdoms. You think I tossed them away like rubbish? Asterin suddenly found this no to be in need of her careful attention. Dorian shrugged and unbuckled Damaris, the sword too fine for a mere wyvern trainer. He passed it to Manon too. An ordinary dagger would be his only weapon, and the magic in his veins. If I don't come back, he said, while she tied the ancient blade to her belt, the keys must go to Terrasen. It was the only place he could think of, even if Aelin wasn't there to take them. You'll come back, Manon said. It sounded like more of a threat than anything. Dorian smirked. Would you miss me if I didn't? Manon didn't reply. He didn't know what he expected her to, or why he expected her to. He'd taken all of a step when Asterin clasped his shoulder. In and out, quick as you can, she warned him. Take care of Noreen. Worry indeed shone in the second's gold-flecked black eyes. Dorian bowed his head. With my life, he promised, as he approached her mount and grasped the dangling reins. He didn't fail to miss the gratitude that softened Asterin's features, or that Manon had already turned away from him. A fool to start down this path with her. He should have known better. The guards' faces became clear. Dorian embraced the portrait of a tired, bored handler. He waited for the questioning, but it never came. They simply waved him through, equally tired and bored and cold. Asterin had given him a layout of the northern fang and the Omega across from it, so he knew to turn left upon entering the towering hall. Wyvern bellows and grunts sounded all around, and that rotting scent stuffed itself up his nose. But he found the stables precisely where Asterin had said they'd be, the blue mare patient while he loosely tied her chains to the anchor in the wall. Dorian left Noreen with a soothing pat to her neck and went to see what the Farian gap might reveal. The hours that passed were some of the longest of Manon's existence. From anticipation, she told herself, of what she had to do. Abraxas, unsurprisingly, found them within an hour, his rein sliced from the struggle he'd no doubt waged and won with Sorel. He waited, however, beside Manon in silence, wholly focused upon the gate where Dorian and Noreen had vanished. Time dripped by. The king's sword was a constant weight at her side. She cursed herself for needing to prove to him, to herself, that she refused to let him go into Morhath for practical, ordinary reasons. Erwin wasn't at the Farian Gap. It'd be safer. Somewhat. But if the matrons were there, that was why he'd gone, to learn if they were, to see if Petra truly commanded the host there, and how many Iron Teeth were present. He had not been trained as a spy, but he'd grown up in a court where people wielded smiles and clothes like weapons. He knew how to blend in, how to listen, how to make people see what they wished to see. She'd sent a lead into the dungeons of Morath. Darkness, damn her. Sending the king of Ardalan into the Farian Gap was no different. It didn't stop her breath from escaping when Abraxas stiffened, scanning the sky, and if he heard something, they couldn't. Or as if he heard something, they couldn't. And it was the joy that sparked in her mount's eyes that told her. Moments later, Nareen sailed toward them, making a lazy path over the mountains, a dark-haired, pale-skinned rider atop her. He'd truly been able to change parts of himself, had made his face nearly unrecognizable, and kept it that way. Asterin rushed toward the mare, and even Manon blinked as her second threw her arms around Nareen's neck, holding her tight. The mare only leaned her head against Asterin's back and huffed. Dorian slid off the mare, leaving the reins dangling. "Well?" Manon demanded. His eyes, dark as a Valak's, flashed. She didn't try to explain that her knees had been shaking, still buckled while she handed him his sword, then the 2 keys, her nails grazing his gloved hand. Dorian's eyes lightened to that crushing sapphire, his skin becoming golden once more. The matrons aren't there, only Petra Blueblood and about 300 Iron Teeth from all 3 clans. His mouth curved in a cruel half-smile, cold as the peaks around them, damning. "The way is clear, Majesty." The patrols at the Farian Gap spotted them miles away. The 13 were still allowed to land in the Omega. Manon had left Dorian in the small pass where they'd gathered the 13. If they did not return within a day, he was to do what he wished, go to Morath and Erwin's awaiting embrace, if he was that reckless. There had been no goodbyes between them. Manon kept her heartbeat steady as she sat atop Abraxas just inside the cavernous mouth leading into the Omega, aware of every enemy eye on them, both at their front and back. "I wish to speak to Petra Blueblood," she declared to the hall. A young voice answered, "I assume so." The blue blood air appeared through the nearest archway, an iron band in her brow, blue robes flowing. Manon inclined her head. "Gather your host in this hall." Damn, the wind is strong. Manon hadn't dwelled long on what she'd say, and as the 300 Iron Teeth witches filed into the hall, some coming off their patrols, Manon half wondered if she should have. They watched her, watched the 13, with a wary disdain. Wait, hold on. Oh, okay, never mind. Sorry, I got confused. Their disgraced wing leader, their fallen heir. When all were gathered, Petra, still standing in the doorway where she'd appeared, merely said, "My left debt for an audience, Blackbeak." Manon swallowed, her tongue as dry as paper. Seated atop Abraxas, she could see every shifting movement in the crowd, the wide eyes, her hands gripping swords. "I will not tell you the particulars of who I am," Manon said at last, "for I think you have already heard them." "Crochin bitch," someone spat. Manon set her eyes on the Blackbeaks, stone-faced, where the others bristled with hatred. It was for them she spoke. For them she had come here. "All my life," Manon said, her voice wavering only slightly, "I've been fed a lie." "We don't have to listen to this trash," another sentinel spat. Asterin snarled at Manon's side, and the others fell silent. Even disgraced, the 13 were deadly. Manon went on. "A lie about who we are, what we are, that we are monsters and proud to be." She ran a finger over the scrap of red fabric binding her braid. "But we were made into them. Made," she repeated, "when we might be so much more." Silence fell. Manon took that as encouragement enough. "My grandmother does not plan to only reclaim the wastes when this war is done. She plans to rule the wastes as High Queen. Your only queen." A murmur at the damn, never mind. I tried having a breeze in here. It's fucking windy outside. A murmur at the words, at the betrayal Manon made in revealing her matron's private plans. "There will be no blue bloods or yellow legs, not as you are now. She plans to take the weapons you have built here, plans to use our Blackbeak riders and make you into our subjects. And if you do not bend to her, You will not exist at all. Manon took a breath. Another. We have known only bloodshed and violence for 500 years. We will know it for another 500 yet. Liar, someone shouted. We fly to glory. But Astrid moved, unbuttoning her leather jacket and hoisting up her white shirt, rising in the stirrups to bare her scarred, brutalized abdomen. She does not lie. Unclean. There, the word remained stamped. Would always be stamped. How many of you, Astrid called out, have been similarly branded by your matron, by your coven leader? How many of you have had your stillborn witchlings burned before you might hold them? The silence that fell now was different from before. Shaking, shuddering. Manon glanced at the 13 to find tears in Ghislaine's eyes as she took in the brand on Astrid's womb. Tears in the eyes of all of them who had not known. And it was for those tears, which Manon had never seen, that she faced the host again. You will be killed in this war, or after it, and you will never see our homeland again. What is it that you want, Blackbeak? Petra asked from the archway. Ride with us, Manon breathed. Fly with us, against Morath, against the people who would keep you from your homeland, your future. Murmuring broke out again. Manon pushed ahead. An Iron Teeth Crochan alliance. Perhaps one to break our curse at last. Again, that shuddering silence, like a storm about to break. Astrid sat back in the saddle, but kept her shirt open. The choice of how our people's future shall be shaped is yours. Manon told each of the witches assembled, all the Blackbeaks who might fly to war and never return. But I will tell you this. Her hands shook, and she fisted them on her thighs. There is a better world out there, and I've seen it. Even the 13 looked toward her now. I have seen witch and human and fae dwell together in peace, and it is not a weakness to do so, but a strength. I've met kings and queens whose love for their kingdoms, their peoples, is so great that the self is secondary, whose love for their people is so strong that even in the face of unthinkable odds, they do the impossible. Manon lifted her chin. You are my people, whether my grandmother decrees it or not. You are my people, and always will be. But I will fly against you, if need be, to ensure that there is a future for those who cannot fight for it themselves. Too long have we preyed on the weak, relished doing so. It's time that we became better than our foremothers. The words she had given the 13 months ago. There is a better world out there, she said again, and I will fight for it. She turned Abraxas away, toward the plunge behind them. Will you? Manon nodded to Petra, eyes bright. The air only nodded back. They would be permitted to leave as they had arrived, unharmed. So Manon nudged Abraxas, and he leapt into the sky, the 13 following suit. Not a child of war, but of peace. Damn! Manon is a dreamer. Yeah, she sure is. I don't know if that many people are going to follow them. I wouldn't be surprised if none of them followed her. Damn. Sorry, hold on. Y'all, it's literally freezing. It's 32 degrees right now, and it's only gonna drop. It's only gonna drop. It's gonna be so cold. Please pray that the power does not go out like it did last year. 2 years ago? No, I think it was last year. Thank you! I love it too! She put the little Avengers symbol on it too. And she was like, I don't know if Spider-Man's an Avenger or not. And I was like, no, he definitely is. Thanks. I'm gonna order more from her shop. She has like an Etsy shop if y'all want to check it out. It's called The Southern Thistle. It's The Southern Thistle, yeah. And I don't know if she does customs like this one, but she does like embroidered stuff. Will you get snow there again? Unfortunately, I don't think snow is in the forecast for my area in Texas, but I know like Places that are like more north than me, like Dallas, have already gotten snow. I wish that it would snow here, but I'm also kind of scared for it to snow here again because I don't want our power to go out. All right, chapter 44. How shall I carve you up? Oh. How shall I carve you up today, Aelin? Kareen's words were a push of hot breath at her ear as his knife scraped down her bare thigh. No, it couldn't have been a dream. The escape, Rowan, the ship to Terrasen. Kareen dug the tip of his dagger into the flesh above her knee, and she gritted her teeth as blood swelled and spilled as he began twisting the blade a little deeper with each rotation. He had done it so many times now, all over her body. He would only stop when he hit bone, when she was screaming and screaming. A dream, an illusion. Her escape from him, from Maeve, had been another illusion. Had she said it? Had she said where the keys were hidden? She couldn't stop the sob that ripped from her. Then a cool, cultured voice purred. All that training, and this is what becomes of you. Not real. Arobin, standing on the other side of the altar, was not real. Even if he looked it, his red hair shining, his clothes impeccable. Why is Arobin there? Her former master gave her a half smile. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no, 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 no. Oh no, 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 no. I haven't read his name in so long, it caught me off guard. Oh no. Oh no. No. We're good. It's okay, we're good. We got it, we're good. Okay, we're good. Her former master gave her a half smile. Even Sam held out better than this. I'm sorry, Sam. It wasn't me saying it. Kareen twisted the knife again, slicing through muscle. She arched, her scream ringing in her ears. From far away, Fenris snarled. You could get out of these chains if you really wanted, Arobin said, frowning with distaste. If you really tried. No, she couldn't. And everything had been a dream, a lie. You let yourself remain captive, because the moment you're free, Arobin chuckled, then you must offer yourself up, a lamb to slaughter. She clawed and thrashed against the shredding in her leg, not hearing Kareen as he sneered, only hearing the king of the assassins, unseen and unnoted beside her. Deep down, you're hoping you'll be here long enough that the young king of Ardalan will pay the price. Deep down, you know you're hiding here, waiting for him to clear the path. Arobin leaned down against the side of the altar, cleaning his nails with a dagger. Deep down, you know it's not really fair that those gods picked you, that Elena picked you instead of him. She bought you time to live, yes, but you were still chosen to pay the price. Her price and the gods. Arobin ran a long, fingered hand down the side of her face. Do you see what I tried to spare you from all these years? What you might have avoided had you remained Selena, remained with me. He smiled. Do you see, Aelin? She couldn't answer, had no voice. Kareen hit bone and Aelin lunged upward, hands grasping for her thigh. No chains weighed her, no mask smothered her, no dagger had been twisted into her body. Breathing hard, the scent of musty sheets clinging to her nose, the sounds of her screaming replaced by the drowsy chirping of birds, Aelin scrubbed at her face. The prince who'd fallen asleep beside her was already running a hand down her back in silent, soothing strokes. Beyond the small window of the ramshackle inn somewhere near Fenharrow and Ardalin's border, thick veils of mist drifted. A dream. Just a dream. She twisted, setting her feet to the threadbare carpet on the uneven wood floor. Dawn isn't for another hour, Rowan said. Yet Aelin reached for her shirt. I'll get warmed up then. Maybe run, as she had not been able to do in weeks and weeks. Rowan sat up, missing nothing. Training can wait, Aelin. They've been doing it for weeks now, as thorough and grueling as it had been at Mistward. She shoved her legs into her pants, then buckled on her sword belt. No, it can't. Aylin dodged to the side, Rowan's blade sailing past her head, snipping a few strands from the end of her braid. She blinked, breathing hard, and barely brought Goldrin up in time to parry his next attack. Metal reverberated through the stinging blisters coating her hands. New blisters for a new body. 3 weeks at sea, and her calluses had barely formed again. Every day, hours spent training at swordplay and archery and combat, and her hands were still soft. Grunting, Aylin crouched low, thighs burning as she prepared to spring, but Rowan halted in the dusty courtyard of the inn, his hatchet and sword dropping at his sides. In the first light of dawn, the inn could have passed for pleasant, the sea breeze from the nearby coast drifting through the lingering leaves on the hunched apple tree in the center of the space. A gathering storm to the north had forced their ship to find harbor last night, and after weeks at sea, none of them had hesitated to spend a few hours on land, to learn what in the hell had happened while they'd been gone. The answer, war. Everywhere, war raged. But where the fighting occurred, the aging innkeeper didn't know. Boats didn't stop at the port anymore, and the great warships just sailed past. Whether they were enemy or friendly, he also didn't know. Knew absolutely nothing, it seemed, including how to cook and clean his inn. They'd need to be back on the seas within a day or two, if they were to make it to Terraston quickly. There were too many storms in the north to have risked crossing directly there, their captain had said. This time of year it was safer to make it to the continent's coast than sail up it. Even if that command and those very storms had landed them here, somewhere between Fenharrow and Ardalan's border, with Rifthold a few days ahead. When Rowan didn't resume their sparring, Aylin scowled. What? It wasn't so much of a question as a demand. His gaze was unfaltering, as it had been when she had returned from her run through the misty fields beyond the inn and found him leaning against the apple tree. It's enough for today. We've hardly started. She lifted her blade. Rowan kept his own lowered. You barely slept last night. Aylin tensed. Bad dreams. An understatement. She lifted her chin and threw him a grin. Perhaps I'm starting to wear you down a bit. Despite the blisters, she'd gained back weight, at least. Had watched her arms go from thin to cut with muscle, her thighs from reeds to sleek and powerful. Rowan didn't return her smile. Let's eat breakfast. After that dinner last night, I'm in no hurry. She didn't give him a blink of warning before she launched herself at him, swiping high and with Goldrin and stabbing low with her dagger. Rowan met her attack, easily deflecting. They clashed, broke apart, and clashed again. His canines gleamed. You need to eat. I need to train. She couldn't stop it. That need to do something. To be in motion. No matter how many times she swung her blade, she could feel them. The shackles. And whenever she paused to rest, she could feel it too. Her magic. Waiting. Indeed, it seemed to open an eye and yawn. She clenched her jaw and attacked again. Rowan met each blow, and what the fuck is rattling? And she knew her maneuvers were descending into sloppiness, knew he let her continue rather than seizing the many openings to end it. She couldn't stop. War raged around them. People were dying, and she had been locked in that damned box, had been taken apart again and again, unable to do anything. Rowan struck, so fast she couldn't track it, but it was the foot he slid before her own that doomed her, sending her careening into the dirt. Her knees barked, skinning beneath her pants, and her dagger scattered from her hand. I win, he panted. Let's eat. Aylin glared up at him. Another round. Rowan just sheathed his sword. After breakfast. She growled. He growled right back. Don't be stupid, he said. You'll lose all that muscle if you don't feed your body. So eat. And if you still want to train afterward, I'll train with you. He offered her a tattooed hand, though you'll likely hurl your guts up, either from the exertion or from the innkeeper's suspect cooking. But Aylin said, people are dying. In Terraston. Everywhere. People are dying, Rowan. Your eating breakfast isn't going to change that. Her lips curled into a snarl, but he cut her off. I know people are dying. We're going to help them, but you need to have some strength left, or you won't be able to. Truth. Her mate spoke truth, and yet she could see them, hear them, those dying, frightened people whose screams so often sounded like her own. Rowan wiggled his fingers in silent reminder. Shall we? Aelin scowled and took his hand, letting him haul her to her feet. So pushy. Rowan slid an arm around her shoulders. It's the most polite thing you've ever said to me. We're finally back to Elide and Lorcan. Thank God! My whole car is like shaking. Elide tried not to wince at the grayish gruel steaming in front of her, especially with the innkeeper watching from the shadows behind his taproom bar. Seated at one of the small, round tables that filled the worn space, Elide caught Gavriel's eye from where he pushed at his own bowl. Gavriel raised the spoon to his mouth, slowly. Elide's eyes widened further as he opened his mouth and took a bite. His swallow was audible, his cringe barely contained. Elide reined in her smile at the pure misery that entered the lion's tawny stare. Aelin and Rowan had been finishing up a similar battle when she'd entered the taproom minutes ago, the queen wishing her luck before striding back into the courtyard. Elide hadn't seen her sit still for longer than it took to eat a meal, or during the hours when she'd instructed them in word marks after Rowan had requested she teach them. It had gotten her out of the chains, the prince had explained, and if the Ilkin were resistant to their magic, then learning the ancient marks would come in handy with all they faced ahead. The battles, both physical and magic. Such strange, difficult markings. Elide couldn't read her own language, hadn't tried to in ages, didn't suppose she'd be granted the opportunity anytime soon. But learning these marks, if it helped her companions in any way, she could try. Had tried, enough to know a few of them now. Gavriel dared another mouthful of the porridge, offering the innkeeper a tight smile. The man looked so relieved that Elide picked up her own spoon and choked down a bite. Bland and a bit sour. Had he put salt in it rather than sugar? But it was hot. Gavriel met her stare, and Elide again restrained her laugh. She felt, rather than saw, Lorcan enter. The innkeeper... Fuck, I lost my spot. The innkeeper instantly found somewhere else to be. The man hadn't been surprised to see Five Fae enter his inn last night, so his vanishing whenever Lorcan appeared was certainly due to the glower that the male had perfected. Indeed, Lorcan took one look at Elide and Gavriel and left the dining room. They'd barely spoken these weeks. Elide hadn't known what to even say. A member of this court, her court, forever. He and Aelin certainly hadn't warmed toward each other. No, only Rowan and Gavriel really spoke to him. Fenris, despite his promise to Aelin not to fight with Lorcan, ignored him most of the time. And Elide, she'd made herself scarce often enough that Lorcan hadn't bothered to approach her. Good. It was good. Even if sometimes she found herself opening her mouth to speak to him, watching him as he listened to Aelin's lessons on the word marks, or while he trained with the queen, the rare moments when the two of them weren't at each other's throats. Aelin had been returned to them, was recovering as best she could. Elide didn't taste her next bite of porridge. Gavriel, thankfully, said nothing, and Anith didn't speak either, not a whisper of guidance. It was better that way, to listen to herself. Better that Lorcan kept his distance, too. Elide ate the rest of her porridge in silence. Fucking hell. Rowan was right. She nearly vomited after breakfast. 5 minutes in the courtyard and she had to stop, that miserable gruel rising in her throat. Rowan had chuckled when she'd clapped a hand over her mouth and then shifted into his hawk form to sail for the nearby coast and their awaiting ship to check in with its captain. Rolling her shoulders, she'd watched him vanish into the clouds. He was right, of course, about letting herself rest. Whether the others knew what propelled her, they hadn't said a word. Aelin sheathed Goldrin and loosed a long breath. Deep down, her power grumbled. She flexed her fingers. Maeve's cold, pale face flashed before her eyes. Her magic went silent. Blowing out another shuddering breath, shaking the tremor from her hands, Aelin aimed for the inn's open gates. A long, dusty road stretched ahead, the fields beyond barren. Unimpressive, forgotten land. She'd barely glimpsed anything on her run at dawn beyond mist and a few sparrows bobbing amongst the winter dry grasses. Fenris sat in wolf form at the edge of the nearest field, staring out across the expanse, precisely where he'd been before dawn. She let him hear her steps, his ears twitching. He shifted as she approached and leaned against the half-rotted fence surrounding the field. "Who'd you piss off to get the graveyard shift?" Aelin asked, wiping the sweat from her brow. Fenris snorted and ran a hand through his hair. "Would you believe I volunteered for it?" She arched a brow. He shrugged, watching the field again, the mist still clinging to its farthest reaches. "I don't sleep well these days." He cut her a sidelong glance. "I don't suppose I'm the only one." She picked at the blister on her right hand, hissing. "We could start a secret society for people who don't sleep well. As long as Lorcan isn't invited, I'm in." She huffed a laugh. "Let's go. Or let it go." His face turned stony. "I said I would." "You clearly haven't." "I'll let it go when you stop running yourself ragged at dawn." "I'm not running myself ragged. Rowan is overseeing it. Rowan is the only reason you're not limping everywhere." "Truth." Aelin curled her aching hands into fists and slid them into her pockets. Fenris said nothing, didn't ask why she didn't warm her fingers or the air around them. He just turned to her and blinked 3 times. "Are you all right?" A gull's cry pierced the gray world, and Aelin blinked back twice. "No." It was as much as she'd admit. She blinked again, thrice now. "Are you all right?" 2 blinks from him, too. No, they were not all right. They might never be. If the others knew, if they saw past the swagger and temper that they didn't let on. None of them commented that Fenris hadn't once used his magic to leap between places. Not that there was anywhere to go in the middle of the sea. But even when they sparred, he didn't wield it. Perhaps it had died with Connell. Perhaps it had been a gift they had both shared, and touching it was unbearable. She didn't dare peer inward to the churning sea inside her. Couldn't. Aelin and Fenris stood by the field as the sun arched higher, burning off the mists. After a long minute, she asked, "When you took the oath to Maeve, what did her blood taste like?" His golden brows narrowed, like blood and power. "Why?" Aelin shook her head. "Another dream, or hallucination. If she's on our heels with this army, I'm just trying to understand it. Her, I mean, you plan to kill her." The gruel in her stomach turned over, but Aelin shrugged, even as she tasted ash on her tongue. "Would you prefer to do it?" "I'm not sure I'd survive it," he said through his teeth. "And you have more of a reason to claim it than I do." "I'd say we have an equal claim." His dark eyes roved over her face. "Connell was a better male than how you saw him that time, than what he was in the end." She gripped his hand and squeezed. "I know." The last of the mist vanished. Fenris asked quietly, "Do you want me to tell you about it?" He didn't mean his brother. She shook her head. "I know enough." She surveyed her cold, blistered hands. "I know enough," she repeated. He stiffened, a hand going to the sword at his side, not at her words, but Rowan dove from the skies, a full-out plunge. He shifted a few feet from the ground, landing with the predator's grace as he ran the last steps toward them. Goldring sang as she unsheathed it. "What?" Her mate just pointed to the skies, to what flew there. We're getting into something right now? What are we getting into right now? What are we getting into right now? Chapter 45. Rock roared against rock, but Never mind, we're not getting into shit right now. Rock roared against rock, and Irene braced a hand on the shuddering stones of Westfall Keep as the tower swayed. Down the hallway, people screamed, some wailing, some lunging over family members to cover them with their bodies, while debris rained. Dawn had barely broken, and the battle was already raging. Irene pressed herself into the stones, heart hammering, counting the breaths until the shaking stopped. The last assault. It had been 6. She got to 3, mercifully. 5 days of this. 5 days of this endless nightmare, with only the blackest hours of the night offering reprieve. She had barely seen Kale for more than a passing kiss and embrace. The first time, he'd been sporting a wound to the temple that she'd healed away. The next, he'd been leaning heavily on his cane, covered in dirt and blood, much of it not his own. It was the black blood that made her stomach turn. Valg. There were Valg out there, infesting human hosts. Too many for her to cure. No, that part would come after the battle, if they survived. Soon, too soon, the injured and dying had begun pouring in. Eredia had organized a sick bay in the Great Hall, and it was there that Irene had spent most of her time. Where she'd been headed, after managing a few hours of dreamless sleep. The tower steadied itself, and Irene announced to no one in particular. The wrecks are still holding off the tide. Morath only fires the catapults because they cannot breach the keep walls. It was only partially true, but the families crouched in the hall. Their bedrolls and precious few belongings with them seemed to settle. The wrecks had indeed disabled many of the catapults that Morath had hauled here, but a few remained, just enough to hammer the keep, the city, and while the wrecks might have been holding off the tide, it would not be for long. Irene didn't want to know how many had fallen. She only saw the number of riders in the Great Hall and knew it would be too many. Eredia had ordered the injured wrecks to take up residence in one of the interior courtyards, assigning 5 healers to oversee them, and the space was so full you could barely move through it. Irene hurried onward, mindful of the debris scattered on the tower stair. She'd nearly snapped her neck yesterday slipping on a piece of fallen wood. The groans of the injured reached her long before she entered the Great Hall. The doors flung open and revealed row after row of soldiers, from the Kagante and Anil alike. The healers hadn't... I did not say that right. I know, I'm sorry. I got it mixed up with the word they used for king. The healers didn't have cots for all. So many had been laid on bedrolls. When those had run out, cloaks and blankets piled over cold stone had been used. Not enough. Not enough supplies, and not enough healers. They should have brought more from the rest of the host. Irene rolled up her sleeves, aiming for the wash station near the doors. Several of the children whose families sheltered in the keep had taken up the tasks of emptying dirty tubs and filling them with hot water every few minutes, along with the basins by the wounded. Irene had balked to let children witness such bloodshed and pain, but there was no one else to do it. No one else so eager to help. Anil's lord might have been a grand bastard, but its people were a brave, noble-hearted group. One that had left more of a mark on her husband than his hateful father. Irene scrubbed her hands, though she'd washed them before coming down here, and shook them dry. They couldn't waste their precious few cloths on drying their hand. Her magic had barely refilled. Despite the sleep she'd gotten, she knew that if she looked to the battlements, she'd spy KoA using his cane, perhaps even atop the battle horse they'd outfitted with his brace. His limp had been deep when she'd last seen him, just yesterday afternoon. He hadn't complained, though, hadn't asked her to stop expending her power. He'd fight, whether he was standing or using the cane, or a chair, or a horse. Eredia met Irene halfway across the hall floor, her dark skin shining with sweat. They're bringing a rider. Her throat's been slashed by talons, but she's still breathing. Irene suppressed her shudder. Poison on the talons? So many of the Valg beasts possessed it. The scout who flew by to warn us of her arrival wasn't sure. Irene pulled her toolkit from the satchel at her hip, scanning the hall for a place to work on the incoming rider. Not much room, but there, by the wash basins where she just cleaned her hands. Enough space. I'll meet them at the doors. Irene made to hurry for the gaping entryway, but Eredia gripped Irene's upper arm, her thin fingers digging gently into her skin. You've rested enough. Have you? Irene shot back. Eredia had still been here when Irene had trudged to bed hours ago, and it seemed Eredia had either arrived well before Irene this morning or hadn't left at all. Eredia's brown eyes narrowed. I'm not the one who needs to be careful of how much I push myself. Irene knew Eredia didn't mean in regard to KoA and the link between their bodies. I know my limits, Irene said stiffly. Eredia gave a knowing look to Irene's still flat abdomen. Many would not risk it at all. Irene pressed. Is there a threat? No, but pregnancy, especially in the early months, is draining. That's without the horrors of war, or using your magic to the brink every day. For a heartbeat, Irene let the words settle in. How long have you known? A few weeks. My magic sensed it on you. Irene swallowed. I haven't told KoA. And think if there were ever a time to do so, the healer said, gesturing to the shuddering keep around them. It would be now. Irene knew that. She'd been trying to find a way to tell him for a while, but placing that burden on him, that worry for her safety and the safety of the life growing in her, she hadn't wanted to distract him, to add to the fear she already knew he fought against just in having her here, fighting beside him, and for KoA to know that if he fell, it would not be her life alone that now ended. She couldn't bring herself to tell him. Not yet. Perhaps it made her selfish, perhaps stupid, but she couldn't, even if the moment she'd realized it in the ship's bathing chamber, when her cycle had not come and she had begun counting the days, she had wept with joy, and then realized what exactly carrying a child during war would entail, that this war might very well be still raging, or in its final horrible days when she gave birth. Irene had decided that she'd do everything in her power to make sure it did not end with her child being born into a world of darkness. "I'll tell them when the time's right," Irene said a shade sharply. From the open hall doors, shouts rose to clear the way for the injured. Aurelia frowned, but rushed with Irene to meet the townsfolk bearing an already bloodied stretcher and the near-dead ruck rider atop it. The horse beneath KoA shifted, but stayed firm where they stood along the lower battlements of the keep walls. Not as fine a horse as Faracia, but solid enough. A brave-hearted beast who had taken well to his brace-equipped saddle, which was all he'd asked for. Walking, KoA knew, would not be an option when he dismounted. The strain in his spine told him enough about how hard Irene was already working. The sun barely risen, but he could fight just as well from horseback, could lead these soldiers all the same. Ahead, stretching too far for him to count, Erwin's army launched at the city for another day of all-out assault on the walls. The ruck soared, dodging arrows and spears, snatching soldiers from the ground and pulling them apart. Atop the birds, the Ruckin unleashed their own torrent of fury in careful, clever passes organized by Sartak and Nesrin. But after 5 days, even the mighty rucks were slowing, and Morath's siege towers, which they had once easily shattered into scraps of metal and wood, were now making their way to the walls. Ready the men for impact," KoA ordered, the grim-faced captain standing nearby. The captain shouted the command down the lines KoA had gathered just before dawn. A few bands of Morath soldiers had managed to get grappling hooks into the walls these past 2 days, hoisting up siege ladders and droves of soldiers with them. KoA had cut them down, and though the warriors of Anil had been unsure what to do with the demon-infested men who came to slay them, they'd obeyed his barked commands. Quickly staunched the flow of soldiers over the walls, severing the ties that held the ladders to them. But the siege towers that approached, those would not be so easily dislodged, and neither would the soldiers who crossed the metal bridge that... hold on. I'm zoning out, sorry. And neither would the soldiers who crossed the metal bridge that would span the tower and the keep walls. Behind him, levels up, he knew his father watched. Had already signaled through the lantern system Sartak had demonstrated how to use that they needed rucks to fly back, to knock the towers down. But the rucks were making a pass at the far rear of Morath's army, where the commanders had kept the valg lines in order. It had been Nesrin's idea that It had been Nesrin's idea last night to stop going for the endless front lines and instead take out those who ordered them, try to sow chaos and disarray. The first siege tower neared, metal groaning as wyverns, chained to the ground and wings clipped, hauled it closer. Aww, the poor wyverns. Soldiers already lined up behind it in twin columns, ready to storm upward. Today would hurt. KoA's horse shifted beneath him again, and he patted a gauntlet-covered hand to the stallion's armored neck. The thud of metal on metal was swallowed by the din. Patience, friend. Far out, past the reach of the archers, the catapult was reloading. They'd launched a boulder only 30 minutes ago, and KoA had ducked beneath an archway, praying the tower base it struck did not collapse, praying Irene wasn't near it. He'd barely seen her during these days of bloodshed and exhaustion, hadn't had a chance to tell her what he knew, to tell her what was in his heart. He'd settled for a deep but brief kiss and then rushed to whatever part of the battlements he'd been needed at. KoA drew his sword, the freshly polished metal whining as it came back free of the sheath. The fingers of his other hand tightened around the handles of his shield, a Rux rider's shield, light and meant for swift combat. The brace that held him in the saddle remained steady, its buckles secure. The soldiers lining the battlement stirred at the nearing siege tower, the horrors inside. They were once men, KoA called, his voice carrying over the clamor of the battle beyond the keep walls. They can still die like them. A few swords stopped quivering. You are people of Anil, KoA went on, hefting his shield and angling his sword. Let's show them what that means. The siege tower slammed into the side of the keep, and the metal bridge at its uppermost level snapped down, crushing the battlement parapets beneath. KoA's focus went cold and calculating. His wife was in that keep behind him, pregnant with their child. Oh, fuck, so he knows. He would not fail her. Okay, we're almost done with this chapter. A siege tower had reached the keep walls and now unloaded soldier after soldier right into the ancient castle. Despite the distance, Nesrin could see the chaos on the battlements, just barely make out KoA atop his gray horse, fighting in the thick of it. Soaring over the army, hurling arrows and spears at them, Nesrin banked left, the Ruks behind her following suit. Across the battlefield, Bort and Yedin, leading another faction of Rukken, banked right, the two groups of Rukken a mirror image swooping toward each other, then back to plow through the rear lines. Just as Sartak, leading the third group, slammed from the other direction. They'd taken out 2 commanders, but 3 more remained. Not princes, thank the gods here. And the 36 in the... Yeah, but Valg all the same. Black blood coated Salki's armored feathers, coated every Ruk in the skies. She'd spent hours cleaning it off of Salki last night, and the Rukken had, not willing the risk, the old blood interfering with how their feathers caught the wind. Nesrin knocked an arrow and picked her target again. The Val commander had evaded her shot the last time, but he would not now. Salki swept low, taking arrow after arrow against his breastplate and his thick feathers and skin. Nesrin had almost vomited the first time an arrow had found its mark days ago, a lifetime ago. She now also spent hours picking them from his body each night, as if they were thorns from a prickly plant. Sartak had spent that time going from fire to fire, comforting those whose mounts were not so fortunate, or soothing the Ruks whose riders hadn't lasted the day. Already a wagon had been piled high with their sulde, awaiting the final journey home to be planted on Arudin's barren slopes. When Salki came close enough to rip several Valg off their horses and shred them apart in his talons, Nesrin fired at the commander. She didn't see if the shot landed, not as a horn cut through the din. A cry rose from the Rukken, all glancing eastward, toward the sea, to where the Dargan cavalry and foot soldiers charged for the unprotected eastern flank of Morath's army, Hussar atop her Muniki horse, leading the Kagan's lost host herself. 2 armies clashed on the plain outside an ancient city, one dark and one golden. They fought, brutal and bloody, for the long hours of the gray day. Morath's armies didn't break, though, and no matter how Nesrin and the Rukken, led by Sartak and Hussar's orders, rallied behind their fresh troops, the Valg kept fighting. And still Morath's host lay between the Kagan's army and the besieged city, an ocean of darkness. When night fell, too black for even the Valg to fight, the Kagan's army pulled back to assess, to ready for their attack at dawn. Nesrin flew Irene and KoA, bloodied and exhausted, down from the again secured keep walls. Fuck, I lost my spot. So they might join in the war council between the Kagan's royal children. All around, soldiers groaned and screamed in agony, healers led by Hafisa herself rushing to tend to them before the night gave way to more fighting. But when they reached Princess Hussar's battle tent, when they had all gathered around a map of Anil, they had only a few minutes of discussion before they were interrupted by the person KoA had least expected to walk through the flaps. Let me guess, his father? You're almost free of this chapter, B. Sorry, I know I was struggling through it. I didn't mean to. Chapter 46. Parenth appeared on the horizon. we're with Adian. I don't care about him. I'm so sorry. I don't care about him. But not in like a this chapter's gonna be boring way, but just in like I literally can't stand the sight of him right now. Like he's disappointed me so severely that I literally can't. I literally can't. Parenth appeared on the horizon, the dark stone city nestled between a cobalt lake and a small mountain range that also bore its name. The castle had been built along a towering mountain bordering the city, its narrow towers tall enough to rival those in Orinth. The great city walls had been torn down by Ardalan's army and never restored, the buildings along its edges now spilling onto the fields beyond the ice-covered Lannis River that flowed between the lake and the distant sea. It was on those fields that Adian deemed they'd make their stand. The eyes held as they crossed the river and organized their reduced lines once more. The Whitethorn royals and their warriors were nearly burnt out, their magic a mere breeze. But they'd kept Morath at bay behind. Sorry, all my phone's dying. The thieves' home city and see if men and women from the city might come to fill their depleted ranks. Not many. Nox returned with a few hundred, even less trained warriors. No magic wielders. But they did have some weapons, most old and rusted. Fresh arrows, at least. Vernon Lockin had seen to it that his people had remained unarmed, fearing their uprising should they learn the true heir to Parenth had been held captive in the highest tower of the castle. But the people of Parenth already had enough of their puppet lord, it seemed. And at least they had blankets and food to spare. Wagons hauled them in hourly, along with healers, none magically gifted, to patch up the wounded. Those who were too injured to fight were sent on the supply wagons to the city, some piled atop one another. But a warm blanket and a hot meal would not add to their numbers, or keep Morath at bay. So Adian planned, keeping his Bane commanders close. They would make this count, every inch of terrain, every weapon and soldier. He didn't see Lysandro. Aelin made no appearances either. The queen had abandoned them, the soldiers muttered. Adian made sure to shut down the talk, had snarled that the queen had her own mission to save their asses, and if she wanted Erwin to know about it, she would have announced it to them all, since they were so inclined to gossip. It eased the discontent, barely. Aelin had not defended them with her fire, had left them to be butchered. Some part of him agreed, wondered if it would have been better to ignore the keys, to use the two they possessed and obliterate these armies rather than destroy their greatest weapon to forge the lock. And that is why he does not have the keys. Because he thinks like that. What is wrong with you? I mean, I get it. I don't get it, but I do. Hell, he would have wept to see Dorian Havillard in his considerable power at that moment. The king had blasted Ilken from the sky, had snapped their necks without touching them. He'd bow before the man if it saved them. It was midday when Morath's army reached them once more, their mass spilling over the horizon, a storm sweeping across the field. He'd warned the people of Parenth to flee into Oakwald if they could. Locking themselves in the castle would be of little use. It had no supplies to outlast a siege. He debated using it for this battle, but their advantage lay in the frozen river, not in letting themselves be cornered to endure a slow death. No one was coming to save them. There had been no word from Rolf. Galen's forces were depleted, his ships spread thin on the coast, and no whisper of the remainder of Ansel of Briarcliff's soldiers. Adian kept that knowledge from his face as he rode his stallion down the front lines, inspecting the soldiers. The tang of their fear fogged the frosty air, the weight of their dread a bottomless pit, yawning open in their eyes as they tracked him. The Bane began striking their swords against their shields, a steady heartbeat to override the vibrations of the Morath soldiers marching toward them. Adian didn't look for a shifter in the ranks. Ilken flew low over Morath's teeming mass. She'd undoubtedly go for them first. Adian halted his horse in the center of their host. The iced over Lannis almost buried beneath the snow that had fallen the night before. Morath knew it existed, though. Those vowed princes had likely studied the terrain thoroughly, had likely studied him thoroughly, too. His technique and skill. He knew he'd faced one of them before it was done. Perhaps all of them. It wouldn't end well. Yet, as long as they risked the crossing, he didn't care. I found the rhythm. I lose the rhythm of his name every single time I see it. Endymion, there it is. Endymion and Selene, the only Fae left with a whisper of power, were stationed just behind the first of the Bane. The eyes of his own soldiers were a phantom touch between his shoulder blades, on his helmeted head. He had not prepared a speech to rally them. A speech would not keep these men from dying today. So Aedion drew the sword of Orinth, hefted his shield, and joined the Bane's steady beat. Conveying all the defiance and rage in his heart, he clashed the ancient sword against the dented, round metal rose shield. Aedion had never told Aelin, had wanted to wait until they returned to Orinth to reveal that the shield he'd carried, had never lost, had belonged to her father. And so many others before that. It had no name. Even Ro had not known its age, and when Aedion had spirited it away from Ro's room, the only thing he grabbed when the news came that his family had been butchered, he had let the others forget about it too. Even Darrow had not recognized it. Worn and simple, the shield had gone unnoticed at Aedion's side, a reminder of what he'd lost, what he'd defend to his final breath. The soldiers from the Allies' armies picked up the beat as Morath reached the edge of the river. A barked command from the two Valg princes on horseback had the first of the foot soldiers crossing the ice, the Ilken holding back near the center, to strike when they'd been worn down. Ren's Alsbrook and their remaining archers kept hidden behind the lines, picking targets amongst those winged terrors. On and on, Aedion and their army banged their swords against their shields. Closer and closer, Morath's army spilled onto the frozen river. Aedion held the beat, their enemy not realizing the sound served another purpose, to mask the cracking of the ice deep below. Morath advanced until they were nearly across the river. Enda and Selene needed no shouted order. A wind swept over the ice, then slammed into it, between the cracks they'd been creating. Then they shoved the ice apart, tore it to shreds. One heartbeat, Morath was marching toward them. The next they plunged down, water splashing, shouts and screams filling the air. The Ilken shot forward to grab soldiers drowning under the weight of their armor. But Ren Alsbrook was waiting, and at his bellowed order the archers fired upon the exposed Ilken. Blows to the wings sent them tumbling to the ice, into the water, going under, some Ilken dragged by their own thrashing soldiers. The Valg princes each lifted a hand as if they were of one mind. The army halted at the shore, watching as their brethren drowned, watching as Endymion and Selene kept ripping the ice apart, forbidding it to freeze, over again. Aedion dared to smile at the sight of the drowning soldiers. He found the two Valg princes smiling back at him from across the river. One ran a hand over the black collar at his throat, a promise and reminder of precisely what they'd do to him. Aedion inclined his head in mocking invitation. They could certainly try. The Fae Royal's power broke at last, heralded by the ice that formed over the drowning soldiers, sealing them beneath the dark water. A gust of black wind from the Valg princes, and the soldiers didn't so much as look down as they began marching over the ice, ignoring the banging fists beneath their feet. What the hell is going on? Aedion guided his horse behind the front line to where Killian and Elgin were mounted on their own steeds. 2,000 of the enemy had gone into the river at most. None would emerge. Barely a dent in the force now advancing. Aedion didn't have words for his commander, who had known him for most of his life, perhaps better than anyone. They had no words for him either. When Morath reached their shore at last, swords bright in the gray day, Aedion let out a roar and charged. We're fighting? I thought the whole point was for them to be able to get away. We're fighting? I thought they were retreating. What's going on? Hold on. The Ilken had learned that a shapeshifter was amongst them and wore a wyvern's skin. Lysandra realized it after she'd swept for them, leaping for the army's ranks to slam into a cluster of three. 3 others had been waiting, hiding in the horde below. An ambush. She'd barely taken out 2, snapping off their heads with her spiked tail before their poison claws had forced her to flee. So she'd drawn the Ilken back toward her own lines, right into the range of Ren's archers. They'd gotten the Ilken down, barely. Shots to the wings that allowed Lysandra to rip their heads from their bodies. As they'd fallen, she dove for the ground, shifting as she went. She landed as a ghost leopard and unleashed herself upon the foot soldiers already pushing past Terrason's joined shields. The skilled unity of the Bane was nothing against the sheer numbers forcing them back. The Fey warriors, the silent assassins, Ansel and Galen's few remaining soldiers spread between them. Neither of those lethal units could halt them either. So she clawed and tore and sundered back, bile burning her throat. Bile burning her throat. Snow turned to mud beneath her paws. Corpses piled. Men, both humans and Valg, screamed. Adian's voice shattered down the lines. Hold that right flank. She dared a glance toward it. The Ilkin had concentrated their forces there, slamming into the men in a phalanx of death and poisoned. Then another order from the prince. Hold fast on the left. He'd repositioned the Bane amongst the right and the left flanks to account for their wobbling on the southern plains, yet it was not enough. Ilkin tore into the cavalry, horses shrieking as poison talons ripped out their innards, riders crushed beneath falling bodies. Adian galloped toward the left flank, some of his Bane following. Lysandra sliced through soldier after soldier, arrows flying for both armies. Still Morath advanced, onward and harder, driving the Bane back as if they were little more than a branch blocking their path. Her breath burned in her lungs, her legs ached, yet she kept fighting. There would be nothing left of them by sundown if they kept at it like this. The other men seemed to realize it too, looked beyond the demons they fought to the tens of thousands still behind in orderly rows, waiting to kill and kill and kill. Some of their soldiers began to turn, fleeing the front lines. Some outright hurled away their shield and sprinted out of the path of Morath. Morath seized it. A wave crashing to shore, they slammed into their front line, right into the center, which had never broken, even when the others had wobbled. They punched a hole right through it. This is not looking too good, y'all. Chaos reigned. Adian roared from somewhere, from the heart of hell. Reform the lines. The order went ignored. The Bane tried and failed to hold the line. Ansel of Briarcliff bellowed to her fleeing men to get back to the front, Galen Ash River echoing her commands to his own soldiers. Ren shouted to his archers to remain, but they too abandoned their posts. Lysandra slashed through the shins of one Morath soldier, then ripped the throat from another. None of Terrason's warriors remained a step behind her to decapitate the fallen bodies. No one at all. Over. It was over. Useless, Adian had called her. Lysandra gazed toward the Ilkin feasting on the right flank and knew what she had to do. I don't like this out of that. I don't like the way that made me feel. Something has to happen. They can't die. Something literally has to happen. Who's coming? Rolf? I know that Aelin and them are heading toward Terrason, but they're gonna be nowhere near there to get there on time. So who's gonna come? Who's gonna come out of the woodwork? Yeah, but not them. So remember that I literally don't trust y'all. When it's about character deaths, I literally do not trust y'all. They literally can't die. Like, what the heck are we gonna do if they die? Chapter 47. Adian had imagined they'd all be killed where they stood, battling together until the end, not picked off one by one as they fled. He'd been forced far behind the lines when Morath plunged through, even the Bane having to peel away from the front. Soon, the rout would be complete. Arrows still flew from deep behind their ranks, Ren having seized some order, if only to cover their retreat. Not an orderly marched to the north. Soldiers ran, shoving past one another. A disgraceful end, unworthy of a mention, unworthy of his kingdom. He'd stand. He'd stay here until they cut him down. Thousands of men charged past him, eyes wide with terror. Morath gave chase, their Valg princes smiling as they awaited the feasting sure to come. Done. It was done, here on this unnamed field before Parenth. Then a call went across the breaking lines. The fleeing men began to pause, to turn toward the direction of the news. Adian skewered a Morath soldier on his sword before he fully understood the words. The queen has come. The queen is at the front line. For a foolish heartbeat, he scanned the sky for a blast of flame. None came. Dread settled into his heart, fear deeper than any he'd known. The queen is at the front line, at the right flank. Lysandra. Lysandra had taken on Aylin's skin. He whirled toward the non-existent right flank, just as the golden-haired queen in borrowed armor faced two Ilkin, a sword and shield in her hands. No. The word was a punch through his body, greater than any blow he'd felt. Adian began running, shoving through his own men, toward the too distant right flank, toward the shapeshifter facing those Ilkin. No claws or fangs or anything to defend her beyond that sword and shield. No. He pushed men out of the way, the snow and mud hindering each step as the two Ilkin pressed closer to the shifter queen, savoring the kill. But the soldiers slowed their fleeing. Some even reformed the lines when the call went out again. The queen is here. The queen fights at the front line. Exactly why she had done it. Why she had donned the defenseless human form. No. The Ilkin towered over her, grinning with their horrible, mangled faces. Too far. He was still too damn far to do anything. One of the Ilkin slashed with a long, clawed arm. What are y'all talking about? Gwynreal versus Elreal debate? Oh. Y'all all know who I see him with. Me. One of the Ilkin slashed with a long, clawed arm. Her scream, as poison talons ripped through her thigh, sounded from above the din of battle. She went down, shield rising to cover herself. He took it back. It's a little too late for that. I was really, really sad. And I was really fucking hoping that she wouldn't go this way with their story, but I knew it was gonna go like this. Like, I knew something was gonna happen to Lysandra, like something really bad was gonna happen to her, and that it was gonna make Adian go, oh shit, I was wrong. Oh shit, I should have never treated her like that. Like, and I was really hoping that it wouldn't be like that, because it's so dumb. She does not have to literally die in front of you for you to think twice about the way you treat her. What? Now I'm mad. Now I'm mad because Lysandra should not have to go through this for Adian to have the mental capacity to be like, maybe I was too harsh on her. Like, exactly. It's too little, too fucking late. Too little, too late. Because the damage has been done. So, like, it literally doesn't matter how he feels in this moment. It doesn't matter. And I'm so mad. Like, I'm livid because I love Lysandra. Lysandra is, like, one of my favorite characters because she has come so far. And for her story to end, I don't know if it's the end of her story, but for her story to possibly end, to make a man realize that he was being irrational, it's bullshit. It's bullshit. I'm so sorry. I'm so mad right now. I'm so mad right now. Oh, I'm like, I'm so mad. So mad. Let's get this over with because if she dies, I'm gonna be so, ugh. She went down, shield rising to cover herself. He took it back. He took back everything he had said to her, every moment of anger in his heart. Adian shoved through his own men, unable to breathe, to think. He took it back. He hadn't meant a word of it. Not really. Lysandra tried to rise on her injured leg. The Ilkin laughed. Please, Adian bellowed. Oh, get a grip. The word was devoured by the screams of the dying. Oh, I'm so mad! Please. He'd make any bargain. He'd sell his soul to the dark god if they spared her. He hadn't meant it. He took it back. All those words. Useless. He'd called her useless. Had thrown her into the snow naked. Oh, now we feel bad about that. Now we feel bad about that. Not when we did it. Not after we did it. Now. Now we feel bad about that. He took it back. Adian sobbed, flinging himself toward her as Lysandra tried again to rise, using her shield to balance her weight. Men rallied behind her, waiting to see what the Firebringer would do, how she'd burn the Ilkin. There was nothing to see, nothing to witness, nothing at all but her death. Yet Lysandra rose, Aelin's golden hair falling in her face as she hefted her shield and pointed the sword between her and the Ilkin. The queen has come. The queen fights alone. Men ran back to the front line, turned on their heels, and raced for her. Lysandra held her sword steady, kept it pointed at the Ilkin in defiance and rage, ready for the death soon to come. She had been willing to give it up from the start, had agreed to Aelin's plans, knowing it might come to this. One shift, one change into a wyvern's form, and she'd destroy the Ilkin, but she remained in Aelin's body, held that sword, her only weapon, upraised. Terrasen was her home, and Aelin her queen. She'd die to keep this army together, to keep the lines from breaking, to rally their soldiers one last time. Her leg leaked blood onto the snow, and the two Ilkin sniffed, laughing again. They knew what lurked under her skin, that it was not the queen they faced. She held her ground, did not yield 1 inch to the Ilkin, who advanced another step. For Terrasen, she would do this. For Aelin. He took it back. He took it all back. Adian was barely 100 feet away when the Ilkin struck. He screamed as the one... Oh, I don't even want to read this or she's gonna die. I'm being so serious. He screamed as the one on the left swept with its claws, the other on the right lunging for her as if it would tackle her to the snow. Lysandra deflected the blow to the left with her shield, sending the Ilkin sprawling, and with a roar slashed upward with her sword on the right, ripping open the lunging Ilkin from navel to sternum. Black blood gushed, and the Ilkin shrieked, loud enough to set Adian's ears ringing, but it stumbled, falling into the snow, scrambling back as it clutched its belly open. Adian ran harder, now 30 feet away, the space between them clear. The Ilkin who'd gone sprawling on the left was not done. Lysandra's eye on the one retreating, it lashed for her legs again. Adian threw the sword of Orinth with everything left in him as Lysandra twisted toward the attacking Ilkin. She began falling back, shield lifting in her only defense, still too slow to escape those reaching claws. The poison-slick tips brushed her legs just as his sword went through the beast's skull. Lysandra hit the snow, shouting in pain, and Adian was there, heaving her up, yanking his sword from the Ilkin's head and bringing it down upon the sinewy neck, once, twice. The Ilkin's head tumbled into the snow and mud, the other beast instantly swallowed by the Morath soldiers who had paused to watch, who now looked upon the queen and her general and charged, only to be met by a surge of Terrasen soldiers racing past Adian and Lysandra, the battle cries shattering from their throats. Adian half dragged the shifter deeper behind the reformed lines, through the soldiers who rallied to their queen. He had let the poison out. He had to get the poison out, sorry. Hold on, I think I have to plug in my phone. Okay, my phone's gonna sound a little janky because it's connected to my car now, but it's okay, we'll get through it. We'll be fine. Trying to balance it. Fuck it. Duck. Is that good? Good? Okay. No! Maybe if I put it over here. There. I think that's good. Good? Good? We won't fall again? I'm sorry. I think... There, okay. That's good. I'm a little higher up than what I was, but it's fine. Just let me finish this. No, just let me finish this. Hold on. Hold on. Okay. No, it's tilting. God damn it. Okay. Maybe if I just have to hold it. Girl, let me get you a stand. No, it's okay. It's okay. I think we did it. Good? Okay. Lysandra hit the snow. Oh, wait, hold on. He had to get the poison out. Sorry, that's where we were. Had to find a healer who could extract... Why did I think I was falling? God, fuck! Oh, sorry, I'm scared! He had to get the poison out, had to find a healer who could extract it immediately. Only a few minutes remained until it reached her heart. Lysandra stumbled, a moan on her lips. Adian swung his shield on his back and hauled her over his shoulder. A glimpse at her leg revealed shredded skin, but no greenish slime. Perhaps the gods had listened. Perhaps it was their idea of mercy, that the Ilgan's poison had worn off on other victims before it had gotten to her. But the blood loss alone... Adian pressed a hand over the shredded, bloody skin to staunch the flow. Lysandra groaned. Adian scanned the regrouping army for any hint of the healers' white banners over their helmets. None. He whirled toward the front lines. Perhaps it was a Fey warrior skilled enough at healing. With enough magic left, Adian halted, beheld what broke over the horizon. Iron-teeth witches. Several dozen mounted on wyverns, but not airborne. The wyverns walked on land, heaving a mammoth, mobile stone tower behind them. No ordinary siege tower. A witch tower. It rose 100 feet high, the entire structure built into a platform whose make he could not determine with the angle of the ground, and lines of chained wyverns dragging it across the plain. A dozen more witches flew in the air around it, guarding it. Dark stone, word stone, had been used to craft it, and window slits had been what the fuck? Had been interspersed throughout every level. Not window slits. Portals through which to angle the power of the mirrors lining the inside, as Man in Blackbeak had described, all capable of being adjusted to any direction, any focus. All they needed was a source of power for the mirrors to amplify and fire out into the world. Oh, gods. Fall back, Adian screamed, even while his men continued to rally. Fall back. With his face sight, he could just make out oh my god, this is bad. He could just make out the uppermost level of the tower, more open to the elements than the others. Witches in dark robes were gathered around what seemed to be a curved mirror, angled into the hollow core of the tower. Adian whirled and began running, carrying the shifter with him. Fall back. The army beheld what approached. Whether they realized it was no siege tower, they understood his order clearly enough. Saw him sprinting, Aelin over his shoulder. Manon had never known the range of the tower, how far it might fire the dark magic rallied within it. There was nowhere to hide on the field. No dips in the earth where he might throw himself and Lysandra, praying the blast went over them. Nothing but open snow and frantic soldiers. Retreat! Adian's throat strained. He glanced over his shoulder as the witches atop the tower parted to let through a small figure in onyx robes, her pale hair unbound. A black light began glowing around the figure. The witch. She lifted her hands above her head, the power rallying, the yielding. Man in Blackbeak had described it to them. Iron-teeth witches had no magic but that, the ability to unleash their dark goddess's power in an incendiary blast that took out everyone around them, including the witch herself. The dark power was still building, growing around the witch in an unholy aura, when she simply walked off the lip of the tower landing, right into the hole in the tower's center. Adian kept running, had no choice but to keep moving, as the witch dropped into the mirror-lined core of the tower and unleashed the dark power within her. The world shuddered. Adian threw Lysandra into the mud and snow and hurled himself over her, as if it would somehow spare her from the roaring force that erupted from the tower, right at their army. One heartbeat their left flank was fighting as they retreated once more. The next, a wave of black-tinted light slammed into 4,000 soldiers. When it receded, there was only ash and dented metal. Oh my god! What is happening? Oh my god! That's it? Sarah! Why would you do this to me? Oh my god! What's happening? What's happening in this world? Is Galen gonna die? Is Galen gonna die? Is Galen gonna die? I don't want Galen to die. I don't want Lysandra to die. The Silent Assassins? Who else? Ren? Who else? They literally, this cannot be for real. Y'all cannot be for real. This is not for real. What did I just read? Oh, so now I literally have to go live again at some point soon. I have a try. Sarah! I literally have to go live again sometime soon because I can't. Okay. I don't know if I can go live tomorrow. What's today? Thursday? I definitely can't go live on Saturday or Sunday. Monday is an option. Tuesday is also an option. Those are the days I have off. I have off today, tomorrow, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Maybe I can go live on Monday. Maybe I can go live tomorrow. Maybe I can go live tomorrow. If I go live tomorrow, will I know what happens? Maybe I will. Maybe I'm going to go home, see what we're doing tomorrow. If we're not doing anything, I'm going to go live tomorrow. Because, girl, I cannot not know what's going on. Oh my god! And I thought the worst thing that was going to happen right now was that Lysandra was going to die. They got witches out here. I hate this series. I hate SJM. I hate everything right now. I just hope that Galen, Ren, Lysandra, the leader from the Silent Assassins, I forgot his name. There's so many characters in here that are... Christmas will be canceled! Christmas will be canceled! I promise. Alright. Well, I have to pee really bad. All those nerves, all that excitement, I have to pee now. Exploding witches? No, literally. Just end the book there. So it's only gonna get worse. Great. So now we're getting into when everyone starts dying. All right. This is the start. This is the start to my downfall. Well, Merry Christmas. Okay. Well, I will try to go live tomorrow. If I don't go live tomorrow, I hope you'll have a very Merry Christmas or, Happy Holidays, whatever you guys are celebrating. I hope you have a very happy time. And do you know which chapters you're doing next? Not off of the top of my head. I would have to look. I don't know which chapter. Oh, in all of this madness, I have forgotten to talk about literally. What is this? I don't know what that is. This series is kind of good. I started New Moon yesterday. I'm over halfway done with it. I just have not been able to put it down. God, it's so good. And I hate Stephanie for making me like Jacob more in the book. I actually really like Jacob in the book. He was very pushy and very forward in the movies. I really like him so far in the books. Really, really like him. Okay, anyway, I just wanted to say that. Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you all for being so patient with me always, because stuff just happens and I ghost y'all for literally weeks at a time, and y'all are always so understanding. So thank you so much. I love y'all so much. I hope y'all have a very happy time, a very merry time. And then you eat lots of good food and get lots of cool presents. And I will hopefully see y'all tomorrow. If not, for sure, I will be going live on Monday. So yeah, I love y'all so much. Bye.